Is of course an appropriate response to thank you? I've recently been told that my habit of saying of course when someone says thank you comes off weird rude. Apparently, the appropriate responses are no problem, no worries, you're welcome, etc. I've been told no problem is rude, because it implies that they've inconvenienced you, and personally to me you're welcome comes across as presumptuous. It's really just a matter of cultural background. That being said, if anyone is willing to read into your pleasantries and find bad intentions, I think that says more about them. It's a perfectly cromulent response. Saying of course is basically the same as saying no worries, because the sentiment is of course, don't even worry about it. I had a friend that would respond with of course when I thanked her for something, and to me it felt so much more genuine than you're welcome. It made it feel to me like she actually wanted and was happy to help me. I definitely don't see how it's worse than no problem. Of course. I had an ex-GF who would tell me I was rude for saying that. She said that to her it came off as lazy and like doing favors for her was a chore. Granted at this point, we basically hated each other but needed to stay together to afford rent. I don't miss those times. I always say of course, as in, of course I would have done this nice thing. I don't see how it's rude. Of course, it was my pleasure. Or similar sentiment is what that's short for. So yes, that's an acceptable response. I find this to be a generational thing. Boomers and older Gen X tends to feel like responses like no worries or of course to be dismissive, and millennials and Gen Z generally find you're welcome to be way too formal for most situations. The only polite and appropriate response to thank you is to say no spank you. I think as long as you don't answer fuck you Mark you're fine. Not the person that told you that is the weird one. It's perfectly acceptable. I say of course as in, of course I would do this for you, no need to thank me. Was the person who said that of course is inappropriate a boomer, by chance? This seems like the kind of thing my mom would be upset about, then call us whiny bitches for asking a boss not to call us baby cakes. I have never understood why some people get offended by anything other than you are welcome. I mean, are you really thanking me if you expect only what you will accept? Seems like your thank you might need some work. I personally wouldn't be offended by that. I hear it's common in the US to respond in some places. In the UK, that would be the verbal equivalent of spitting in your mum's face with tears of joy. Of course, no problem, and anytime are my three on shuffle. It's perfectly fine, and I think it's more humble than you're welcome, especially with the appropriate tone. Of course to me translates to oh you're thanking me? Of course I would have done it for you anyway, don't worry about it. People complain about how nobody has manners anymore, but then nitpick things like this, and it's absurd. I personally think of course is much more cordial than no problem. Yes, it depends on the region though. Saying yep or no problem is a Midwestern thing, but can be rude, I think, in the South. Of course should be fine anywhere USA. I was told never use negative words when saying of course, you're welcome, or my pleasure. Saying no problem sounds like there might have been a problem, and the word no is bad. My go-to response is of course, it's my pleasure. I work in the service industry. Definitely depends on tone and situation. I hold the door open for a mom with a stroller, I respond of course and smile, because being thanked is nice, but of course I should do it if I have the ability. If I lend someone $1,000 and they say thank you, I say you're welcome, because of course makes me sound flippant and like I'm obviously doing so much better than them that of course I have money to lend them. Woman shrugging light skin tone depends on scenario, inflection, body language, etc. I say of course when someone says thank you. It is definitely better than a generic robotic you're welcome. The people that tell you that are delusional. I think it leaves a lot of room for misinterpretation. Most of my job is helping people and doing things for others. I found that some people feel intimidated by needing help. Those same people have a tendency to find insult where it doesn't exist. I just stick with the happy to help or anytime. Really depends on the context and the relationship with the individual. Seems like a perfectly okay reply to use. I personally use no problem. However, some of the older generations see anything other than you're welcome as rude. I think it's a cultural thing from generation to generation. It's fine. Whoever told you that is a moron. You sound like me. People take me the wrong way because I respond to things similarly to the example you shared. It seems to boil down to a person's vocabulary and exposure to speech patterns from outside their immediate culture that can lend context to uncommon things said to them. Of course is short for, of course I would do that for you or give that to you. It is not rude. I read somewhere a while back that it's also a generational thing. My mom would say you're welcome because it implies she did something for you and deserves the thank you. Millennials tend to say no problem or no worries because they feel more like it was their requirement obligation to help. I use of course all the time. I'm assuming those people are culturally sensitive to the language. Did you just move to a new region? Never thought I would actually think about this, but having done so, I've discovered I actually prefer, of course. Saying it in my head, the subtext of you're welcome feels like I should be honored to have been helped, while, of course feels like I'm worth the trouble. Never really thought about it, but appreciate you for asking. I say that sometimes. I always interpreted it as being like no problem as in of course I'd do whatever. People get offended by anything, lol. I usually say of course, and I think it's a perfectly good response. I work with college students, and I want them to know that, of course I'm going to help you, you don't even need to thank me, it's my job. Dumb people may interpret this as of course. You are thankful to me. There's nothing wrong with of course. Other terms I've used are most welcome, my pleasure, anytime, you're welcome. I don't even know what a good response is, anymore. I just nod as if it was nothing and carry on. I actually consider of course to be arguably higher up on the politeness scale than no worries and no problem, and it's definitely higher than you're welcome. I would rank common responses from most to least polite as follows. My pleasure, but of course, no problem, no worries, it's nothing, you're welcome, don't mention it, sure thing, you got it, all in a day's work, sure, yep, don't get used to it. Honestly, I find it more appropriate than no problem because that expression implies that there could have been a problem, while for me I say of course all the time because if I'm doing something worth being thanked for, of course I would have done it for them, I chose to. It seems pretty neutral to me. I can see how someone might interpret it as yeah, obviously in some contexts. Ultimately, I don't think it would be reasonable for someone to deem it rude, especially if the person who said it was otherwise polite. If I said that, it would mean of course I would help you with this, and to me, that's not something rude to say. People love to feel disrespected for some reason. I always say, you got it, bitch. It's basically the same as don't mention it, no problem, or no worries. Whoever told you that is a weird person, I say it all the time. Tell them I said they were weird please. I always say of course, because you're welcome seems like an automated response. Even if it's genuine, it feels so flat to me. Also, nobody's welcome to a favor just by asking for one, or just because I happen to notice you needed something. But of course I'm happy to help out. Like 10 years ago someone pointed out the implication of entitlement by saying you're welcome and it's stuck with me ever since. I don't think it's rude. My BF says I got you when I say thank you.